Welcome back for part 2. There's plenty underway, so we're gonna dive right in. In the first segment, we had a bolt that was seized in the knuckle for the left rear ABS sensor. It just sheared off during removal. We're gonna start by fixing that. First, we are going to center punch the top of the broken piece seized inside to prepare for drilling it out. This will help in maintaining a predetermined center point while we bore out the precise diameter hole we need. Starting with the most reasonably small bit, we are going to incrementally increase in size, boring out the hole we need to repair the knuckle. During this process, we're going to continue to apply oil for lubrication purposes, more specifically to help with cooling. As we get to the thicker final stages of drilling, there will be excessive heat. By reducing the majority of that friction, we lower the risk of making a mistake or prematurely wearing out our bits. You could likely accomplish the same outcome with less drilling stages, but this just seemed to be the most practical way. Finally, we'll drill out with a bit matching the diameter of the bolt being extracted in preparation for recreation of the threads. After the proper sized hole has been made and the unnecessary debris from the old bolt has been removed, we can now tap out the new threads. Using a thread gauge, I was able to determine the bolt as being an M8-125 thread pitch. We're going to use the matching spec tap to fix this. The hardest part of that process being maintaining the same input angle as you begin to recreate threads. Honestly, I ended up finding this to be astronomically difficult, given the location of this specific hole. The elongated attachment point for the rear toe arm on the knuckle becomes a major obstruction during this. Because of this, I ended up using a pair of locking pliers or vice grips to begin the process and the proper T-handle from the kit to send it home. Be patient, take your time, and keep things clean and lubricated until you make it all the way through. With the tap removed, I cleared the debris from the process with some parts cleaner. Now I can grab the undamaged bolt from the opposite side and test our new threads. Perfect. It threads in smoothly, and it actually goes in farther than we needed to hold the ABS sensor. And now finally to test with the actual unit in place. And just like that, we're good to go. Now to get to the last of the boring stuff before we can get to making some parts beautiful again. Now that the rear bumper cover is off the car, I'd like to remove the 4 brackets from it. 3 of which hold the bumper onto the vehicle, and the last acting as a license plate bracket and light assembly. The first of the 2 bolts holding on the license plate bracket snapped. I'm hoping this doesn't become a common theme. Given the nature of where this part is, I'm not too surprised, and I think we'll have better luck going forward. Fortunately, the other bolt cooperated, but we're gonna have to work at the first to get it out. Now to remove some of the electronics, a simple squeeze to remove the attachment point for the connector, and a twist to pull the bulb out of the housing. One Phillips head screw secures the housing to the bracket. Simply tilt and lift it off. Now I'll simply peel away the remaining gasket material and squeeze and pull out the clip that allows that screw to hold on the housing. For the top and side bumper brackets, just pop out the plastic clips and they'll come right off. This license plate bracket is honestly pretty horrible. We're going to begin prepping it for paint with a nice bath in Evaporust. It's not magic, but it definitely got us the majority of the way there and likely freed up what's left of that seized bolt. And boom, that bolt's out. Nothing a pair of vice grips couldn't handle. Now a quick wire wheel to finish up the prep, and we can hang it up ready for paint, awaiting the other pieces. A few passes with the wire wheel and some brake clean, and all the bracketry is ready for paint. Now, onto bushings. With the arms and knuckles off the vehicle, we can now update that 20-year-old rubber to a polyurethane setup. And with everything fully stripped down, we can restore and powder coat the metal. In order to do this with my method, we're going to need a trusty hammer, an assortment of chisels and punches, a powerful drill with a hole saw attachment, and a straight blade. Preferably one that's powered and a blade that's of high tooth count for cutting metal. I'm going to continue to make lame reminders about the use of proper PPE and the importance of making safety a priority. When doing work like this, I recommend finding gloves that you trust and wearing face and/or eye protection. We want to be able to keep doing the things that we love. Anyway, boring disclaimer over. This removal procedure is fundamentally pretty simple, but it can end up being pretty long-winded and frustrating. Don't lose your cool. First and foremost, we're going to drill through the rubber portion of the bushing between the two sleeves with the hole saw bit. In this case, I use a Milwaukee 1 1/16 inch hole saw bit. Things get hot fast, so like earlier, I'm adding oil as I go. Smelling like a burnout in here with all that rubber smoke. Once you've made it through all the bushings with the hole saw, you've essentially removed all the inner sleeves of the bushings. As for the outer sleeves, we're going to have to make a relief cut, break the rust bond, and punch them out. With the arm mounted in a vise, make the deepest relief cut you can manage without damaging the surrounding metal. If the relief cut is too shallow, you may not break the bond with the sleeve. But obviously, you want to avoid unnecessarily marring up the metal for the entry point of the new bushing. Once you feel you've done enough, strike the outer sleeve with a punch, rocking it back and forth until it comes out. Any damage made during this process can be smoothed out later using files and brushes. And now there's all our upper control arm bushings stripped down. Now onto the knuckles. Same procedure as before for these. However, I must admit, I think the bond was much stronger with these. Perhaps it's because they're closer to the ground, but these were definitely more challenging. This particular bushing got trapped in the hole saw when it came out. You will run into some strange speed bumps like this. Once again, stuck in the saw. These knuckle bushings are proving to be far more difficult. Just yank it out with some pliers, but seriously, watch out for that hot, jagged metal. Now the main difference that came to be with the knuckle bushings was the outer sleeves. The bond that they formed with the knuckle was ungodly, and it took so much more to remove them. Unfortunately, after making multiple relief cuts and plunging a punch all around the sleeve, they still didn't budge. Using a 24mm impact socket as a giant punch, I'm going to use a hammer to press them out. That did end up proving effective, but you can see just how seized they were considering how mangled this is. After countless strikes later, same goes for the others. And now with everything we need stripped down, we can kiss this rusty finish goodbye. I just finished painting everything we had prepped, including exhaust hangers and heat shields, and I just received everything back from my powder coater. It's time to get things going in the other direction. Now here they are, the subframe, upper control arms, and knuckles powder coated in Illusion Rare Gold, a now discontinued color from Prismatic Powders. Probably the last bag of it, so it's not something you'll see. It's an interesting gold. Due to its illusionary nature, it has a bit of a green tinge in certain lights. But I've grown to like it, and appreciate its color shifts. A minor departure from the plan, but honestly, when you're replacing and changing every single part of a car, some things are just going to turn out a little bit different than imagined. And that's okay. Let's not get too caught up and overthink things. And be happy that we continue to move forward. And let's be real. Anyone who knows me is aware that gold, black, and purple are going to be pretty prominent here. As for all the other parts, I went OEM style. A nice matching metallic silver for the exhaust hangers, heat shields, and the cover for the filler neck, and a clean satin black for the bracketry. Damn, did that license plate bracket come a long way. Now that we got things looking good, we're going to do what we can to keep things that way. Because everything is still apart, and we have access to things that we may not in the future, I'm going to go ahead and ceramic coat everything that was powder coated. With everything being recoated, it's essentially new, so the prep is much simpler to get this done, and actually took very little time at all. Well worth it, in my opinion. Now let's not forget the hardware. It quite literally holds everything together. I went right ahead and ordered everything that was available to me directly from Mitsubishi themselves. Shout out to John Fleming from the forums for not only helping me find what I needed, but also for providing me with the updated parts numbers to avoid any and all confusion. You're a real one. Thanks. Much of it was actually still available, but there's still things that we're going to have to sort out on our own. As for the things that were found to be irreplaceable, I ended up doing the same rust treatment as before, wire wheeling them to a polish, and finally reached out to some companies about having them properly zinc plated, just like OEM, resulting in honestly not much success. For a multitude of reasons, nobody could really help me. I looked into doing it on my own, at home, but ended up bailing due to many shortcomings. Right when I was running out of options, I got a great phone call from Mark of Recoat Metal Finishing Inc. He told me he was able to take care of exactly what I needed, and it was no trouble at all. I received my parts back in what felt to be immediately, but I was surprised to see that there was no invoice in the box. I called him to ask him what I owed him, and he simply said, "Merry Christmas, don't worry about it." He insisted that he was happy to know he was supporting what I was doing at home. Mark, I don't know who you are, but people like you keep passion projects alive. It may seem like nothing, but kindness and humility like that keep things moving in this world. I'm very grateful. Thank you. Let's move on. It's time to get these new polyurethane bushings installed. Provided with the bushings is some lube. We're going to apply that to the leading edge of the bushings and a little to the parts themselves. These are what would be considered 3-part bushings, 2 halves of polyurethane and a center sleeve. This makes installation far easier, and honestly, I won't lie, I could probably do it by hand if I had to. I used a ball joint press kit to finish the job. A few of the provided inserts and a piece of wood, and I was able to install everything with minimal effort and no damage. Any similar type of clamping tool would probably make quick work of this. You simply wouldn't be able to do it without consistent and even pressure. The 3-part nature of these does make things easier, but it also really makes them want to pop out on you. A cheap C-clamp and a little bit of finesse, you can make this happen. Now with that said, I do find this very easy, but if things are going very troublesome, don't force it. You may need to deburr or smooth the leading edges going in, and if you don't, you may damage the bushings and end up in some trouble. Old cars and new parts don't always play well, so be smart, pay attention to what's happening. With all the new poly bushings installed, we have some refinishing to do on the chassis of the car itself. Before we get to the undercarriage and the frame rails of the unibody, we're going to go ahead and do the wheel wells while everything is uninstalled. I pressure washed to get things as clean as I could. Then proceeded to mask all threaded openings, the opening of the strut tower, the opening for the fuel door, and the brake line. An old habit of mine to get more consistent results is to warm my paint cans before spraying. I simply let just the bottoms of them rest in lukewarm water for a little while. Time to mask up, ventilate the room, cover up my Z to avoid overspray, and get started. First primer, and then our final coat. I can go back later and supplement with undercoating as needed. As for the interior of the frame rails, I ended up passing rust-dissolving chemicals through and cleaned them out thoroughly. And now it's time for the final clean and removal of any remaining debris. I picked up a toilet brush when I was getting my cleaning supplies from the store, and it was honestly perfect for this. And now, after giving it enough air and time, it's time to get the inside coated. Using an internal frame paint with a long tube nozzle and a 5-gallon paint stick, this rig worked amazing. I opted to extend the paint job down, covering the welds and expanding it down into the undercarriage. Not only rust preventative, but it actually looks kind of interesting this way. With the chassis taken care of, we can now get our fuel system issues handled from part 1 and start putting things back together. The condition of the fuel filler neck for this car was worse than I ever would have imagined. This would have become an inevitable failure point for this car had I not started this restoration. Mother Nature and Father Time have definitely taken their toll on this, and I'm not repairing it. I was warned away by others at the low quality of aftermarket options, and was sworn by others that I would never find an OEM one again. Just when I'm not sure what to do, in comes Brandon from the forums, telling me he has a brand new OEM one in box and ready to ship to me tomorrow morning. I am quite genuinely not sure what I would have done without you. So pleasure doing business, Mr. Wagner. A sincere thank you. The comparison of the condition of these two 20 years apart is honestly pretty mind-boggling to see. I noticed a rubber gasket on the old filler neck where it meets the body. We're going to salvage this and use it on the new one. We're going to see if we can liven it up a little bit. I first cleaned it up and let it set in a special chemical, AT205 Reseal. It has polymers in it that revitalize rubber. A little trick I got from Scotty Kilmer. And just like that, it looks and feels like a new gasket. I'm going to throw it on the new neck. It squeezes over the lip, and two little rubber plugs lock it in position. I'm going to use good old 303 protectant to keep the rubber componentry from drying out and getting brittle. And lastly, I'm going to apply a coating of Bow Shield, a rust preventative coating that operates much like a chassis wax, preventing surface rust and corrosion. Like many other things, a few light coats and buff the excess. Hopefully now we can ward off the effects of time, at least just a little bit longer. Now with the different materials protected, we can go ahead and install it on the car and get the fuel system reconnected. Before we take it under the car and start making connections, I'm going to apply some ceramic grease to the ends where the hoses attach. That way we don't have to fight with it too much. Now we can bring it in. Hook the top end into the body where the fuel door goes and slip on all 4 hoses. I went ahead and replaced the old and fracturing spring clamps with some stainless steel worm gear style hose clamps. Make sure that all 4 are snugged up well and stress test to make sure they won't be sliding off on their own. I ended up replacing them at all connections throughout the entirety of the system. Now to install the cover, 2 of the 4 bolts of which support the midsection of the neck. As we begin to reinstall the newly plated bolts back into the chassis, I'm going to be applying a healthy coating of anti-seize, that way things can remain serviceable. A small amount, just enough to coat the threads as they go in, not enough to coat the entirety of the universe like I see people doing. Now we can press the cover up into position to hold everything in place and start installing our hardware. The bottom 2 bolts will sandwich the mounting tabs of the neck against the chassis, holding it in place. These bolts have both flat and lock washers on them. Don't over tighten them, but torque them down enough to flatten the slit of the lock washer so they don't back out from vibration. With everything taken care of down here, we just have to handle things topside with the fuel door. I was originally going to replace the stock plastic fuel door for the OEM aluminum upgrade one. I had since polished and painted it ready for this car, but instead, thanks to my friend Ricardo across the country, we're going to use this. A very unique looking carbon fiber one he made himself. He also really understood the assignment with that gold hardware. I picked up some gold titanium bolts as an upgrade from Dress Up bolts, with the accompanying flat and lock washers to match the stock ones. I put a fresh coat of paint on the sandwich plate, and we're ready to put this all together. First, press the fuel door itself over the neck. And place the sandwich plate into the gap on the top side. Now we can add the 3 bolts. It's a little awkward at first, but things press into place and find their home as you go. With all three snugged up, we just have to attach the catch for the fuel cap. This small ribbed pressure clip pushes into a small hole at the bottom of the doorway. Mine in particular is fighting me a little bit, so I'm going to bore out the hole ever so slightly with a round file. And now just to throw on the cap, and we're all set. It may not match the styling of the car just yet, but I think this looks awesome. And the titanium really sets it off. One of the last reparative and transitionary changes we need to make is with the rear brakes. More specifically, the rear dust shields for the brake rotors. This car will be receiving a fully updated Evo 8 Brembo brake setup. These factory dust shields will not accompany that larger rotor size and need to be removed or altered in some way. I prefer to retain the dust shield, so I'm going to cut and reshape them. We simply need to cut away this lip to match the leading edge of the backing plate. A 45 thousandths cutting wheel on my angle grinder can make quick work of this. Just a few quick passes, and now we can toss this lip aside. And now for the important second stage, the deburring and smoothing of the cut we just made. Although I'm likely to be the only one to ever work on this car, I'm not interested in having it become a sharp, hazardous death trap over a brake upgrade. I wire wheeled it down to smooth that edge and prep it for paint. The nice, fresh, thick coating looks great, and it doesn't look like I tampered with them too much. And now with that update out of the way, we're ready to really start reassembling this thing. Part 3, here we come. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. And as a side note, I apologize for the delay in part 2 of this series. The 350Z needed some pretty serious engine rebuild work done, and I just had to make that a priority. I could make an update video on that in the future. Either way, I'm definitely looking to pick up the pace. Your support's really helping me to do that, so thank you.